Hello, welcome y bienvenidos. I am so excited to be with our guest today on this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. I am your host, Justine Gonzalez, and I'm about to introduce our guest. But if you haven't, go ahead and pause and make sure you hit subscribe because you'll want to get the alerts to see who our guests are on these amazing featured voices episodes that we are releasing here in 2023. But please remember, we still will have our normal episodes. So if you like our 15-minute format as a way to share with your staff or your teams or just for your own personal growth and development, those are also going to be available. But without further ado, I want to get to actually introducing our guest of honor today. Her name is Miss Future Dr. Shawnta Barnes. She's not only a wife and a mother, she is so much more than that, has served a lot of roles across K-12 education, probably too many titles to name. She has her own consulting firm. Her sons have a publishing company. I mean, she's a master gardener. I could go on and on about the things I do know about Shawnta, but I also want to give her the floor to introduce herself. We first crossed paths probably 4 or 5 years ago at a networking event or something in Indianapolis. And then over time, I've gotten the honor of being a panelist for her on her show at Gems. And that's pretty much it. But I do, before I hand off, for our guests to do an intro, I like to always say something I really admire about the guest that is being featured with their voice. And one thing that I really admire about you is your persistence. And I've noticed this not only in your writing and your ability to really demonstrate and show the truth in matters, but also in your life. And from what I do know about you, just your persistence. We were just talking about both of our doctoral journeys. We're both future doctors, but that is something I really notice about you and have heard just in hearing little stories, whether it's about your personal life or family, but your persistence to keep going with a goal and to also just live your life unapologetically. So those are two things specifically that I admire about you. So I'm going to hand it over to you right now. Just anything that you want to introduce about yourselves or that you want the listeners to know about you before we dive into our conversation.
Well, thanks for that wonderful introduction. And I really like that you said I'm very persistent because most of the time when I introduce myself, I either pick and choose the parts of me that's relevant to the situation I'm in because my introductions
Mm.
tend to be long. And people ask, like, how are you doing all these things? And first of all, you have to be persistent to do anything well. And
Mhm.
then my persistence is easy because I do things I'm passionate about. So I think what's important to know or what people find is a very interesting fact about me is that I have 5 education licenses. So I went to Purdue University, left there with a 5 through 12 English license and a 5 through 12 reading license. And then I picked up an English as a new language license, P through 12, library media, P through 12. I ended up picking up a P through 12 reading license at one point in time. So essentially, I have like 2 reading licenses, which is nuts. And then I picked up a building administration license, and I've had a
She just
job.
picked it up. Listener, she just picked it up casually. I'm kidding.
And I've had a job in every single thing I've been licensed in. So most of my career, I've been an English teacher. I've been at English as a new language teacher. I've been a literacy coach. So my reading license got to come into play. I've been an elementary librarian and I've been a school administrator. And I use all of those different backgrounds to help me do my work. And one of the threads that tie all my work together is literacy. All those jobs, where I was a librarian, a teacher, a coach, and administration, literacy has been front and foremost. And then the other thing I do is I work at 2 universities. So I teach classes at Marian University. I teach at IUPUI, and I also supervise all of the or coach. We kind of call supervise/coach all
Mm.
the ENL student teachers at IUPUI. So you may just see me pop up into a building with my IU badge on. You may see me at Marion, and I'm in Marion land. You may see me doing my consulting work through my company, Blazing Brilliance. And as Justine wonderfully stated, I do have my show Ed Gems through Any Recorder. I have my podcast, Brazen Education. You can learn more about me at educatorbarnes.com, and you can see all my other stuff. But and we also serve together, which is important to note, on the IDOE Cultural Competency Advisory Council.
That's right. We
So
did. How could I
yeah, we were
forget?
doing that work together. So just like Justine, it's like you have your work that you're passionate about, but there's also that passion to serve.
Yeah.
Because yes, we want to get paid, obviously, but there's also that sense of serving and giving back to the community, because none of us got to where we are on our own. So giving back to the community is just my way of kind of paying tribute and homage to the people who have pushed me forward. So that's enough about me.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, so we're gonna go back. We're gonna go back in time, actually. So I'm gonna
Okay.
ask you some questions. So this first part, thank you again for just telling us all the details. I didn't see, I told you I wouldn't have known all your credentials to list. But this first part, this first segment, usually in these interviews, we call getting to know you through your cultural origin story. And so one of the curiosities, and I ask different questions in this segment because people who know me or work with me know I love culture. That's actually how I got asked onto that advisory council that you were speaking about. Somebody's like, "Oh, we need more Latino representation." So, sometimes those things that we go, we end up meeting really incredible people. And that is how I met you. So, but one thing I know we both love is reading and writing and books. And because I'm a nerd about culture and I've always loved it, and people who listen to this podcast regularly, that is what we're all about here, is understanding beliefs, norms, values, not only ourselves, but understanding others in those lenses. And so a lot of times in this cultural origin story segment, I ask questions that are related to beliefs or values or norms when we were growing up. And one of my interviews, I asked somebody their favorite food and why, right? We go down these trails and you never know what people might share. A question specifically I came up with for this segment for you is, what was one of your all-time favorite books to read when you were in second, third, fourth grade? So like intermediate school. So when you were growing up, what is a book that stands out to you as like, this was one of my favorite books and this is why? I'm very curious to learn that
Ooh,
about you.
this is a hard question.
I
As
know.
as people can see, I got all these wonderful books behind me, and it's funny because people are like, "That's a really cool like virtual background." I'm like, "Yeah, it is," and it's actually a room in my house, so it's not like a fake background because it
Yeah, this
drives
is
me
a
nuts.
real bookcase.
Yeah, like that's all real. Those are all my real books, but I normally don't actually be in that room when I'm on like a virtual show, because that room is just full of chairs and desks. So that's my family's workspace. So like when you walk right into my house, you see these bookcases, and then I think I have like 10 bookcases in my house. And that was after I donated like 250 books. I have problems buying books. I wish I could tell y'all I'm going to recover from that, but I'm not. The last time I went to a conference, like my biggest issue was trying to fit like 6 books into my suitcase, not clothes, not souvenirs.
Yes.
And then I felt so guilty because I came home and I'm like, I am not going to hide these books. I'm going to be proud of these books.
I knew that. Okay, let's release the shame on this podcast now, because this is why I knew this was the right question for you, because I had the same thing happen when I just came back from traveling in September. I literally left one of my Airbnb hosts a note with 3 books. I was like, these books have really blessed me. And I hope that, and she, to be fair, she had a library in her Airbnb rental with some really incredible, like a diversity of authors, basically, and even types of books and genres. So I felt okay with it because her and I had messaged some, but I'm like, this is so my plight, exactly what you're saying. Cause I'm like writing these notes like, I know this book will bless you as much as it did me. I don't have enough space in my suitcase. Okay.
Yeah, like I love to give people books, and it's like, oh, it's a
I do too.
rectangular item that's wrapped in paper from Shawn-tay. Gee, I wonder what it is. uh, but to but to answer your question, when I was a kid, I was a tomboy, and I still sort of consider myself a tomboy now. I would say now I'm more confident in being that person, because I was raised
Mm.
very conservatively in a missionary Baptist church, and it was very clear to me that women had to look certain ways and had to be certain ways. And with that being said, I just liked any books that were about adventures, and I read way above probably my grade level. So my favorite books when I was young was My Teacher Fried My Brains.
Oh, I read that one. Okay.
And then How to Eat Fried Worms, and then
Uh-huh.
Treasure Island. Treasure Island always ends up on my top 10 book list
Really?
because and then this is gonna sound so nerdy. Once I got to middle school, 'cause I would read Treasure Island like every single year, and I have a copy, and it's back there in this background somewhere of my original copy. It is so worn down, but I actually, in science class, I got through all of our modules like through first semester. So at
Okay.
the end of the first semester, the teacher was like, "You can do whatever you want second semester." So I would sit there I'm gonna take y'all back. Y'all remember that paper where you tore off the sides of it? Y'all know what I'm that computer paper? So that I had my little computer thing, printing out my little story. I wrote a whole entire story about me being a stowaway
Heard
on a
Professor.
yeah, during science class, being a stowaway on a pirate ship. And then I helped the captain, and then I got found, and I got to join this crew of guys. So I like those type of books. But as I got older, I remember Harry Potter coming out, and I remember my church was like, "You can't read that book because it's witchcraft." Because you
Right,
remember
right.
when that came out, I think that was like the '90s. Everyone was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, that's witchcraft." So I never read that book. But the reason I didn't read the book was not because my church told me not to, because I read a lot of stuff that the church told me not to read because I was just that person. I didn't read the book because I started to come to this realization all the books I really liked, white authors, white main characters.
Yep.
To the point of that, I was writing my own stories, putting my little black self in the story.
Yep.
And I'm like, I want to read stuff that's more diverse. And so that's kind of how my reading lens changed. And then the other thing, I loved reading Rainbow. And I think you can't be a millennial. If you're a millennial and you say you don't
I
love reading
mean,
Rainbow, like
come
you can't
on.
even be my friend
How
because you
many
got problems.
how many people had LeVar Burton as their latchkey babysitter? I mean,
For real. Like when they
that was
rolled in
our
that little cart
babysitter.
in the
Yeah.
classroom with the little big old TV on the top, you already knew what was about to happen.
I used to pretend I was hosting, like I was LeVar Burton and I was hosting episodes of Reading Rainbow when I would read books.
And I love it. And the thing about LeVar Burton, a black guy talking about books.
Yeah.
Well, my dad was a black man who read all the time. So when I got older and we got into the education space and they're talking about black males not reading, to me, that was never a narrative I have. And that's a narrative I fight against all the time because I saw this man. And I'm going to tell you this LeVar Burton, follow my Twitter account. I about lost my freaking mind.
Yes,
Yes.
that's you.
I was like, oh my
Yes,
gosh.
LeVar.
And granted, like I'm just like a little nobody, but that filled my bucket so high. Like I was like, oh my gosh, like this really happened. And then I wrote something, a blog for my publishing company that he ended up retweeting, and he said, "True that." And I was like, oh my gosh. So
Yes, I'm your biggest fan girl.
yes, like my goal is to one day meet him in person and try
Yeah.
not to act like a total fangirl, try to have my wits about me and act like a normal human being. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's make it happen. You know what? So I got the first time we got selected to present at ASCD with, my co-author Augie. You've met
Yeah.
him. And then Dr. Comer, he's a superintendent in the Midwest. And so we got selected to actually present in 2020, and the whole thing got canceled because of the pandemic. Guess who the keynote was? Who I
Mm.
was going to fangirl meet in Los Angeles. But low key, I was going to keep it together, Shawn-tay. Me! And then it got canceled. So maybe it's meant to happen another time.
Yeah, I'm telling you that when I tell you high up on my bucket list is to meet this man, it's high. So like I'm like it's gonna happen, and I have to keep it together. I can't be like these. I can't like lose it. I need to act together. So I'm just gonna throw that into the universe. So
There we go.
put it
You
out there.
said it, so now we have to make it happen. Um, so with that being said, did you find that books were an escape for you, or when did you start? Because it's interesting that you started going there, because that was going to be my next question in this area of our interview, was because you did name books that did not have a lot of diversity in their characters and the authors are white. So when did you do you remember starting to recognize as a child, oh, I'm having to draw me and write these stories with me in them, and there aren't characters described like me, they don't look like me on the cover? When did you start noticing that as a child? Because I
I
think
was
that's really important for listeners to hear from your lens. Because
when I was
we
in
both work in
elementary school.
education, but the excuses we hear, oh, well, I just don't have time to diversify my library. I don't know what books to choose. I want listeners to really hear from little Shawn-tay. When did you start noticing?
I would say I noticed in elementary school, but it didn't bother me. And I said it to say, like, my dad he bought this book. I remember it was like the Afro Bets, and it was like
Okay.
these Black kids going through history. And I have it somewhere. And actually, I don't even know if you can get the book anymore. But the kids are going through history. They learn about like the African empires, and it was like a very positive thing. And I'm like, oh, that's a cool book. I didn't make the connection to my dad was buying books like this to have that in my sphere, because I was reading, and like the books I read, they were good books. Like I
Right,
think Treasure
right.
Island is a solid book. I love the book. I loved Charles Dickens, even though that man sometimes has unnecessary details and he didn't get to the point. I love him. But in middle school, my dad started having explicit conversations with me about
Okay.
why he was doing certain things. And then I started looking. So I'm in English class and we're reading Langston Hughes. Love Langston Hughes.
Yeah.
Maya Angelou. Love Maya Angelou. Then I get to high school. Oh, it's Langston Hughes again. Okay, I love Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou again. I'm like, dang, is there any other Black people that write something? And so that was frustrating. And then in sophomore year, my counselor's like, you're too smart to be on the regular diploma track. You need to be on the honors diploma. So sophomore year, I get moved to the honors diploma. And I'm going to tell you, there are schools right now that are still doing that to Black kids. They get overlooked, and then in high school, they get switched. And that caused me a lot of anxiety and stress. One of the classes I took was British literature. Loved the class, read some awesome books. We really got to dive into Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, A Brave New World, all these different things. But I'm like, surely there's some Black people in the UK. We didn't read one Black author. And so when I get to college, I'm like, ooh, I can take African American literature at Purdue, which I did. And the class, the one thing I'll say about the class, there was like 4 Black people, including myself in the class. Everybody else was white, but I thought that was awesome because I don't need to just read these books to see a mirror of myself. Other people need to see people that look like me in other lights and all the shades of what makes up the Black experience, the Black diaspora. So that's when I started to notice. And sometimes you just feel sad. You're like, man, like, why can't I be the main character? And that's kind of what led me to start this publishing company, Brave Brothers Books. Where we are just honing in, trying to publish diverse authors. And it's been a slow growth, but it's been a good slow growth. We have one of our books in the Seesaw platform. I just got notified like weeks ago that it is getting thousands of downloads, thousands of views. People are looking at the book. And so for me, people are like, oh, you're just doing this thing. And the first 2 books I published transparently were my kids' books. But their mom is an English teacher. So like my kids wrote this book, and I'm going to tell you, it was rough because they write their manuscript and I sent them over to a professional editor, and the editor ripped their stuff to shreds. And now my kid is like, I'm like, you know what?
Wait. How old were your sons at the time?
They wrote the book, the initial like story in 1st grade. And then 2nd grade is when the book got published. And in my little background over here, on the top, that's their book. So that is my family trip, my family's Great Smoky Mountain Adventure, and then Ghost Text. So one wrote a fictional book, and the other one wrote a nonfiction book. But it was the quality of that book. So their books will soon be in the Indianapolis public libraries. I'm getting out there. We got the Lexile, so we are officially Lexile our books through the Lexile company, because I wanted my books to be able to be used by schools, and then my kids go on their breaks to other schools and they do author visits. And my other author, she actually lives in the Chicago area, and then I'm working with 5 other authors now. And I want to say this, like, I'm a traditional publisher, so people don't pay me to publish their books. I pick quality manuscripts, and I believe enough to invest in the book to put it out there in the world, and then the author makes profits on each sale of the book. And I did not say something. I'm also the editor-in-chief of Indy K12. So
that's a big one. That's a big one.
I can't believe I forgot that. I'm sorry, Andrew, David, and Jason. Those are my writers. Follow all of them. But Twitter at Indy Kids Winning.
They put out amazing content, not just Shawnta, but also the team that she's
and
publication.
Because I edit so many people, and I used to edit for One Public Ed, DC K12, Memphis K12, EdLanta. I'm probably missing a few. Secondline Blog. I used to edit for those.
You're making me nervous. You're making me nervous to ever write you something again. I'm kidding.
Well, I say all this to say that I feel like I have a good eye when it comes to quality content. And so my acceptance rate is on the low end because I'm looking for quality. And when I say quality, I'm not looking for your grammar quality. I don't care about that. I'm actually looking for your meat and your content. And I feel like, to get back to the question about diverse books, we're getting more diverse books, but they're not a quality. They're just like, you could have taken the character out of the book and stuck a little white kid in there, and the book still works. And so you say it's a diverse book covering a diverse family, but it really isn't. And there is some things. So my kid book, To the Smoky Mountains, it's a Black family going, and my son has jokes. So there's jokes about me in that book. So you want to hear what my son thinks about me for real, you can check that out. But in the book, one of the reasons, so his book ended up on this list for like top 10 books that focus on Appalachia. I was like, whoa. But I say all that to say, when we get asked for author visits, one of the reasons we get asked is because people said, I just want a book. This book is about a Black family taking a vacation. Every time I try to get a book about traveling or going across the US, it's always a white family. And so even though you could argue you could replace us with a white family, there are some things in that book. We talk about the parent tax, where we take parts of our kids' food and eat it, and we say it's a parent tax. Like, there's like this is the way we say things, the way we relate, the way we interact, that brings that quality to the story, and it makes it relatable to Black families, but relatable to all families. So I feel really strongly about quality writing, quality books, and I feel like everyone has a story inside of them. They just have to find the right person to bring it out.
You know what? I just had an idea, but I'll talk with you offline. I don't think I should say it on no, I will ask you, do you have any authors who have written books through the lens of being a third culture kid like myself?
I have not. And you know what, this is your podcast, but you should tell them what the third culture kid is, because I will
really quick, and I talk about it on some other episodes. So if you guys haven't, go back to some initial episodes of this podcast, because I explain why we titled the podcast Cultural Capacity, and there's a couple 2-part episodes too when I was traveling in Puerto Rico. But a third culture kid is essentially somebody who your parents perhaps they come from, you raised in a bicultural home. So what that means is you're assuming this new identity. For me, that is, friends jokingly calling me an Amorican because my mom was Amish Mennonite background. My father's Puerto Rican. I have an alarm going off. Look, I always tell people, I'm like, if you hear stuff, we keep it real. We usually don't spend a lot of time editing these. So there you go. But when I was growing up, right, it was very normal to be at my grandparents' restaurant on a weekend with my grandma making me virgin pina coladas and watching my dad cook in the kitchen, and then go to a family reunion with like 400 Amish people that you're all related to, and they're speaking Dutch, but you don't really fit in both places. So there's so many more of us, right, in the millennial and Gen Z generations, especially in the States, because I mean, it was a very, very big deal to both families when my parents got married, because it just was. And my father's brown and very much proud to be Puerto Rican. That's a whole other story for another day. But yeah, I think when I look back, and I actually had pretty ethnically and racially diverse classmates growing up too, in the system I went to, the public school system I went to and graduated from. And but you start to realize, like, when I look back, and I'm grateful forever to my mother for this, we didn't have a lot of money, so in the summer she would take us to the different branches of our county libraries, and she loved to read, and that was her escape to be able to see the world. And so I was like you, I was, reading ahead of my grade level and stuff. But it's interesting because we grew up reading a lot of Black and white authors too, but we had a lot of diversity. We had a lot of books. My mom loved World War II history, so we actually had a lot of Jewish authors. Like, it was interesting, because I look back and I go, that was such a gift, because I still talk to adults our age that they weren't picking up books and reading books when they were growing up.
Well, see, that's a good point that you mentioned there, because when I was a kid, we were poor, and I didn't realize we were poor until we weren't poor, if that makes sense.
Right.
When we moved and my dad finally got his good job, I'm like, oh, we were poor.
Right.
And my dad, both of my parents grew up poor. My aunt frequently said they were so poor she said we were poor. We couldn't afford the O and the R. So that's how poor they were. But even young, when we were poor, there were always books. So my family decided that even though we have to stretch our money, even though, like, when I was a kid, some of my clothes my mom made. So you know how deep that is when you go into school and your clothes was made by your mama. Yeah. So, but my dad was like, no, some of this income, even though it's not a lot, will go to books. And so when I hear people say, oh, my kid don't like to read, well, did you make it a point? Did you make reading important in your lives? And if you are poor, you can go to the library. The library is a free place, not just to go read books. You can check out movies for free. You can take classes for free. So, like, when I tell you my kids are at like, the pandemic happened and the library branches closed and you couldn't go there, my kids were devastated. And they were like, when is it going to open back up? Because we're going to do this and this and this. And then when they opened back up and then now the kid programming came back in person, they was like, oh my gosh. So I'm like, I always tell people the library is a crucial resource in our community. It does so much more than books, but it exposes you to the world with all the resources, and it's for free. Like,
and that's that. Yeah, we look, listeners, I do know Shawn-tay and I could be on that soapbox for hours, so I'll shift us because that also emerged, when you see unrest, whether it is with people in America who are Black, or people who are Indigenous, or people who are Latinx, or people who are Asian, whatever ethnic group or marginalized group or anything, right? Any different labels that we as humans have created. That's why it still becomes very almost shocking, especially with the technology available, when people go, well, I don't know how to learn about other people. So that, anyways, that's what I mean about the soapbox with it, because exactly what you're saying, and even prior to the internet or anything, we've had these amazing places called libraries. And you don't have to travel. If that's not your thing, you could pick up a book and learn about someone else who's not like you, a place that's not like where you live. Okay, let me stop. Thank you for coming to our after school special.
right.
Next segment. Thank you for answering. I definitely, when you said you liked adventure, I totally ate up, even though now I look back and I'm like, well, this was kind of trash as far as the actual plot and character development. but those choose your own adventure books, whoo! Oh, and how I
And
would
you had
always
to
break the
read them
rules.
to do
I
all the adventures.
Yes, I would break the rules and be like, I would always convince myself, Justine, what you choose is what you choose. And that's the ending. And then I'd have to go back, no, that can't be that. I don't really choose that. It was like, I don't even know if they still exist anymore, but those should be resurrected in my opinion, but with
I
more
agree.
solid content. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go into our next segment, which is really frequently asked questions. And because we have a slew of all types of guests. One of the interviews coming up is with an ex-pastor. I have a DEI attorney. She specializes in DEI matters based out of Toronto. We have all these people like yourself who just have so many experiences, both personal and professional, etc. So I like to ask FAQs. What are some of the most frequently questions you get asked and you can answer a couple different ways because you wear so many hats, but I would be curious, what's one of the most commonly asked questions you get as an entrepreneur who is also a mom? So I hate to use this buzzword, but a mompreneur. Because now don't take that the wrong way, Shawn-tay. You are not Kris Jenner. You never will be. Okay. And that's a great thing. No, but I know you're not a momager, but you helped get the publishing company with your sons off the ground. You also have a consulting firm along with all these endeavors. What are some frequently asked questions you get as both a mom and entrepreneur? So a mamapreneur.
I would say it kind of goes back into like my childhood. In the Bible, it talks about you need to leave an inheritance for your children's children. So that means you should set yourself up to leave something for your grandchildren. And so when I went off to Purdue, like shortly after I was there, my dad had every single thing that they owned paid off: the house, the cars, no credit card debts, none of that. So that was my standard for living. I was at Purdue on that little 5-year plan. I had my tuition covered for 4 years. That 5th year, we had to pull out a loan. My wedding gift from my dad was to pay that loan in full. So I literally went into my marriage with no debt. And then I married my husband, who did come with some debt. So our first thing that we did was like get rid of all this debt.
Yep.
Yes, people have credit cards, but we don't live off of credit cards. Like we are like the people that, oh, I charged 100. I put the hotel on the credit card, and then tomorrow,
points.
right. Then tomorrow I'm gonna pay it off with my debit card because I don't.
Yeah.
We don't live that way, and we also try to live off of one income. So I say all that to say that one of the questions I get asked from people is like, why can't you just stay at home and be a kept wife? I get asked that a lot, especially from people who have religious backgrounds, because they're like, well, surely you can't be a good wife and a good mom and be running 2 businesses. And when we structured Brave Brothers Books, which was my first business that we have started in March of 2019, we set it up to have our kids involved in the business. Yep. And so some people are like, oh, that's just corny. You publish your own kids' books. And I said, I started with my kids because I wanted a safe place to fail in, if that makes sense. Right. To get the process down a solid ISBN. We register for the Library of Congress. We do the copyright paperwork. Actually, when I talked to the public library, one of the librarians says, your book looks just as good as a book from a big publisher. And so to me, that was a pat on my back, but also I'm an avid reader. So, and I'm an English teacher. So I know what quality books should look like. And I learned all the things you have to put in there, but I did that. So if something happens to me tomorrow, then my kids have this revenue stream that they can have, and then hopefully pass that down to their kids. So I get asked, how do I manage it all as a mom? I live on my calendar, and people are like, oh, that just means you work all the time. No, I mean, I live by it. So like date night with my husband's on the calendar. Mom and me time is on the calendar. So I do like dates with my sons, which some people are like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, adults tend to sexualize things. Children don't sexualize things. So when you go on a date, The purpose of the date is to spend quality time and get to know somebody better. We feel like we get to know our kids better in the day-to-day, but we don't. So on these little date times, we do things that my kids want to do. So there are stuff that they want to what is it, Gravity Falls, which I'm kind of loving now. That wasn't the show I initially got into, but that's what something they want to watch. So I'm watching the show with them. We're doing activities together, and then I intentionally sit down and try to learn something new about them. And so when you ask my kids, when I told my kids I was leaving my school administration job to start this consulting business, my kids' reactions were to cheer. They're like, oh, this will be great, because they felt like my day-to-day job was taking me away from them. They feel like with my consulting work and with the publishing company and also doing my stuff at Indy K12, that I can create a schedule that's flexible, which means I can volunteer and be a hallway hero at their school. I can help with other parents playing the 5th grade in the year party last school year.
Right.
I can help do these things. And my favorite time to do date night is actually not at night. So we do like date lunches, because no babysitter, no worrying about any kids, no going out late. And then, because sometimes you get a babysitter, it's like, oh, you got to pick them up at the same night. Now, if I just came home at like 10 or 11 p.m., I don't feel like picking you up. So going during the day and taking like an extended lunch, my husband's able to do his work. I'm able to do my work. And this night you're not dealing with all these people and stuff. And then we love to do them on Monday and Tuesdays because places are not as busy. So that's how I do it all. And I don't measure my worth as a mom and a wife by external people. I measure my worth based on the man I'm married to and the kids I'm raising. Those people are saying that they feel I'm more present, and that's all that matters. So I would say to any moms out there or women out there, just shut off that noise, because I don't know, people just want to make you feel guilty. And I'm like, but I'm happy. My family's happy. There's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. And we have a estate and trust lawyer, and she's not very expensive. And I think people think you have to have a lot of money to do that. But essentially, when my dad died, quick little aside, when my dad died, he had everything set up. He had one account that wasn't hooked to anything. So that one account went through probate. When you go through probate, they set up an estate account in your name. So I tell people, if you do not have your assets in an estate and trust, it's going to go through probate. So you either set it up on the front end when you're alive, or set it up in the back end. Your family has to do when they die, and then they lose some of your assets. So we put everything, all of our assets, our businesses, all of that runs through that. So when we die, everything, it just goes straight to our kids. So for me, people may feel like I'm just out here just trying to grab money and do this stuff, but I'm actually very strategic to federally trademarking all of my stuff. And I just got my last federal trademark like a few weeks ago because I got Blazing Brilliance, but the tagline is empowering minds one resource at a time. I just got that trademark official. So like for me, I'm slow growth, I'm intentional, and I make sure as I'm trucking along that I am penciling in my family, because if you don't pencil in your family, then you'll forget about them. And the people that get shamed are people who have, like, I guess the Kris Jenners who just exploit their kid. I don't know. I'm not that person.
We and hey, disclosure, we don't know Kris personally, so
this is true.
Who knows for real? But
but don't base your life on social media, because a lot of times people see that and you're right. We don't know Kris Jenner. Some of the stuff seems, for what we have saw online, seems suspicious. But Kris Jenner, no social media influencer should be the person that's making your decisions for your life. You should base them on the people that actually care about you and know you.
Oof. You're giving us sermons today, in a good way. Okay, so this next segment is called Inner Child. And I just want to know, what's a key principle that you find yourself still living by today that you could trace back to little you? So basically when you were 10 or under, and you're a young child, what's a principle that you still, when you really reflect and think about it, you're like, yeah, I lived that way as a kid, and I thought that, and I still live by that principle. What's something?
I I would say two things. I feel like I have a conservative lifestyle, and that's from a kid, and then growing your own food. As I said, I was raised missionary Baptist. My great uncle was a pastor of a church. My grandmother was the organist from our church. She was like over vacation Bible school. So you name it, praise
You
team,
were there.
drill team, kids choir, all the things. I was there at church multiple times a week. And so recently I went, a few months ago, I went to a trip in Vegas with two of my friends, and I realized I was getting like low key anxiety, and
Mhm.
it was conflicting with like my conservative values, and so sometimes that shows up, even though I try to honestly push against those. I think they show up sometimes in like things have to be a certain way,
Yeah.
and then to growing your own food. My great grandparents, my great uncles, they grew food. My dad grew food, and the thing I took away from that, you need to know where your food comes from, and food is just so weighted down, and like it's really cheap to grow things. I mean, literally how I grow kale, I have a bed, I throw kale seeds out. I don't do all the little stuff. You can. So I have videos. So gardenershacole.com. Shacole is my middle name. So that's my name under where I do all my gardening stuff. So that we have videos of us doing the little holes for those of y'all that need that. But we just throw stuff and we grow stuff. And so when I tell you for the last 2 weeks we've had kale for dinner every other day, we have. And that may now you may not like kale. We don't have kale the same way. Sometimes in the massage kale salad,
Yeah.
sometimes it's kale chips. We do different things with it.
Yep.
But it's healthy.
Yeah.
And it's filling. For me, it's like and when I'm in the garden, that's how, because people always, self-care is a buzzword, right?
Mhm.
In the garden, that's my self-care. I'm out
Wow.
there, I can just shut the world away. And I know there's this thing called garden bathing or forest bathing, and I haven't done that yet.
What's
But
that? You, like,
so
just roll around in the garden, or
so actually, no. It makes you think that essentially there are people that are officiate these forest bathing activities. You go out into the earth and nature, and you kind of just sit out there, lay out there, and you just take everything out of your mind, and you're bathing yourself in nature. So not like literal, but more like figurative in your brain.
Oh, I didn't know
Um,
that it had a name. I actually do that
yes.
a lot.
So that's the thing. I haven't done it yet, but I mentioned that because there are times in my garden where I'm not out there working. I'm not out there planting something, harvesting something, pulling weeds.
Yeah.
I'm just out there sniffing my lavender, sniffing my rosemary, sniffing my mint, and I'm just sitting and just being still.
Yeah.
And so for me, gardening is a place where I can keep myself healthy. It's a place where I can be active because you got to have some muscles and some energy to be out there in that soil. And it's also a place for me to decompress. So a lot of times, my big ideas, I'm in out there. I'm like, ooh, that's where my ideas come
Yes.
because my
Yes.
brain is clear. And
Yeah.
so, as a kid, I'm like, my daddy's always in the garden. But as an adult, I'm like, oh, I see why he's in that garden because it's
Yeah.
like it's a quiet space where you are just there with your thoughts and you can process. So for
Yeah.
me, I want to be that old lady. Out in the, I got my little cane. I want to be out there growing something, and I'm accommodating myself now because now I'm making like higher raised beds that come up to my waist. So when I get
Oh,
old
so
and
you
I
don't
maybe
have to
can't,
be bent over all the time.
yep.
Oh, that's smart.
So I'm already planning for my future old self.
Okay, I like that. Awesome. Okay. Well, so final, as we come to a wrap up, and we've heard about so many things, incredible impact you're having, not only through your endeavors, but really just living out your God-given gifts and talents and sharing those with the world. So this final part we call unapologetically living out our purpose. And so is there anything in particular, any spaces, and you all know, listeners, we always put links to resources, links to people's social media in the show notes here, but is there any project in particular or event you have coming up, or just anything that you want to specifically highlight and say, this is something I'm working on right now, it hasn't come out yet, but I'm really excited about it? Is there anything like that you just want to shamelessly plug? And then any handles or platforms that you're like, yeah, you can follow me here first because I want more followers or I want more interaction with you or whatever.
I would say the thing that I'm working on is like a call to action to get more authors.
Okay.
Because a lot of times people have been bamboozled out here and they think they have to pay to be published. First of all, if you have to pay to get published, you should just do it yourself because there's plenty of free resources where you can just self-publish. But if you're not going to go that route, um, I'm looking for more people to publish to get them out in the space, in particular children's books, and also in particular resources for teachers or more adult geared books, and also poetry. So if you're listening, you're like, oh, I got a manuscript. I got something I want to get out there. You can go to bravebrothersbooks.com and submit there. And then the other thing I would say during the
quick
huh?
question for listeners. So it does not have to be a children's book, or it does if they're going to just to differentiate.
No, so the three categories I kind of have going now are children's books. I'm trying to get more poetry published, and then like this adult area is kind of open ended because like right now I'm working with a therapist slash social worker who's putting out some content, and so that's more geared towards adults. But I'm also looking for content that can be used by like adult educators in schools. So I have
like even like a workbook or a more something like
any of that. And I'm also really open because I'm also currently working with someone that does plays for schools. And we're trying to finalize the contract right now. And that's not something I initially sought to do, but this person reached out to me and we connected. And so I also say, if you got something that I haven't mentioned, I'm always open to listen. And unlike other people, if you write to me, I do write back. So if I do say not now to you, I actually give you for free specific feedback on what you need to do to be ready for next time. But if you mostly want to follow my work, if you go to educatorbarnes.com or facebook.com/educatorbarnes, you can go there. I will, and my Twitter is Educator Barnes, Instagram, Educator Barnes, TikTok.
Your handles are pretty similar for like similar. I think you grabbed it for all of them.
Yes, and I just now grabbed TikTok. And I'm new on TikTok, so we trying it out. I don't really understand the platform. IG, I've been on there for a while. I still don't really understand it. And it's probably my geriatric millennial resistance to like learning something new. But I will say sometimes people say I'm a little spicy because I do just say what's on my mind. And I will, because part of your question was about being unapologetic. I think the thing that I'm unapologetically trying to fight now is like society norms about what it's like to be a Christian and what it's like to be a Black person in our society. Because like my Black card has been taken so many times and it's just over stupid stuff. Oh, you haven't seen any of the Friday movies? No, it doesn't interest me. You can't do the electric slide. No, I don't want to do the electric slide. You can't play spades. Well, how the heck anybody gonna learn how to play spades and nobody gonna teach anybody how to play spades? I might actually learn that one, but ain't nobody trying to teach. But like me liking country music or rock or just different things I like to do sometimes, as my husband as well, sometimes I get seen as not being Black, or some of the things I do, like I'm interviewing a lady for Keeping and Learning, Denisha Brown, who is a swimsuit designer that lives in Indiana. And I posted myself in the swimsuit that she made for me. I can't believe you had your cleavage and your Pierce belly button on the internet. That's not Christian like. And I'm like, my swimsuit was literally shorts, like the bottom is shorts. And then like, it was like Chris, I'm like, oh my gosh. And to me, you know, everybody like, you kind of covered up. That's not racist at all. And so I'm saying what I'm unapologetically just trying to live my life without the constraints of like social rules that, as you say, are just made up. Some people just made them up and we just keep perpetuating them and we don't even question why we are perpetuating these things. So if you want to know more about my thoughts, just follow Educator Barnes and we can connect.
Well, You are fascinating and also just a delight to connect with and talk with as always. Thank you so much for taking time to be on the show. We'll be really thrilled when, and I know listeners will too, when this episode comes out. Listeners, again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for following and subscribing on your preferred platform. And we will see you, or you will hear us here next time. And as we always close the episode, though, let's continue to get compassionately curious together. Take care.